Montana Territory, June 1883. The day her world split open was the same day the cattle drive came through Bitter Creek Valley, trailing dust and thunder across the open plain. Brielle Langford stood on the porch of the small homestead she had built with her bare hands and her husband's promises. Her eyes were dry, but only because she had run out of tears. Inside the house, her two children Gideon, 9, and Grace, 7, sat on the floor with their arms around each other, silent as stones. Their father, Thomas Langford, was long gone. He had left that morning with the last of their money, the last of their horses, and a woman from town who wore red satin and lies like perfume. Brielle had not begged him to stay. She stared at the empty horizon, her hands clenched on the railing. The wind pulled at her dark hair and the hem of her apron. Everything in her life had been built on the words of a man who had sworn he would never leave. And now, after years of sacrifice, of moving west, of trying to make something out of the wild land and a marriage that had started with hope, he had walked away without looking back. A cloud of dust moved in from the south. She squinted into the distance. Riders, a dozen, maybe more. Cattle followed behind, lowing, their bodies moving like water across the open space. Cowboys, driving them north. She had seen them pass before, but never this close. One horse peeled off from the herd, cutting across the land toward her fence line. The rider was tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low, a rifle slung across his back. He rode like he belonged to the land, like he trusted it to carry him. Brielle did not move. The rider stopped near the fence and swung down. He led his horse closer, then tipped his hat. "Madam," he said, his voice low, steady. "Did not mean to alarm you. Just saw your barn door swinging open and thought maybe you had trouble." She stared at him, then looked past him toward the barn. The door was open. She had not even noticed. "My husband left it that way," she said flatly. The cowboy nodded slowly. "Name is Weston Shaw. We are driving cattle through. Thought I would check in, see if you needed help." She did not answer. He glanced toward the house. "You have children?" "2." He paused. "That why you are standing out here alone?" Brielle turned her face away. "My husband left this morning. Took everything we had of value. I do not need anything else from any man." Weston let the silence fall between them, then said, "Well, I do not lie, and I do not leave folks stranded." She looked at him then, really looked. He had kind eyes beneath the brim of his hat, dirt on his boots, sun in his skin, a man who looked like he had seen a hard life and kept walking anyway. "You do not even know me," she said. "I know what it looks like when someone gets left behind." He stepped back. "We will camp 2 miles north for the night. If you need anything, wood, water, someone to fix that barn door, you come find me." She watched him mount up and ride off without another word. Inside the house, Grace peeked out the window. "Mama, who was that man?" "No one," Brielle said softly. "Just a cowboy." That night, after the children were asleep, Brielle sat by the wood stove, staring into the flickering orange light. She had not cried since morning. She would not cry again. She had 2 mouths to feed, a half-acre of crops, and a barn that barely stood upright. But she could not stop hearing the way Weston had said it. "I do not lie, and I do not leave folks stranded." The next morning, she found Gideon trying to carry a bucket to the well. He was strong for his age, but the handle bit into his small hands. "You should be reading," she told him. "We do not have any books left," he said. "Papa sold them." Her throat closed up. She took the bucket and carried it herself. By mid-afternoon, the barn door had blown wide open again. The hinges were barely holding. She stood in the doorway, staring at the broken latch, her hands trembling. She did not want to go looking for help. But when she looked back at the house, at Grace combing her doll's hair on the porch, At Gideon using a stick to pretend he was guarding the property she knew Pride would not feed or shelter them. She saddled the old mule Thomas had not taken and rode north. The cattle camp was easy to find. Smoke curled from cook fires. Men lounged around bedrolls, their laughter echoing across the grass. She dismounted at the edge, unsure. Weston saw her first. He stood from where he had been sitting near the chuck wagon and came to meet her. "You came," he said gently. "I need help with the barn," she said, keeping her voice steady. "And maybe a few nails, if you have them." He nodded once. "I will come now." They rode back in silence. When they reached the barn, he studied the damage, then rolled up his sleeves without a word. He worked in quiet focus, his hands sure, his movements calm. Brielle watched him from a distance, arms crossed, wary but grateful. "That man who left you," Weston said finally, without turning. "He your husband for long? 7 years. And he lied to you? Every day, turns out." Weston met her eyes. "Some folks lie because they are afraid. Others lie because it is who they are. Either way, it has nothing to do with the person they lie to." Her voice cracked. "He said this land would be our new beginning." "It still can be," Weston said. "You just need someone who does not lie. Someone who will build something true." She stared at him, startled by the quiet intensity in his voice. He looked away then, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I will come back tomorrow. That roof needs patching." "You do not have to." "I want to." The next day he came again. And the day after that. He brought Gideon a whittling knife. He gave Grace a small carved horse. He fixed the roof, the front step, the chicken coop. He never asked for anything, never tried to push past her walls. He just showed up and told the truth. One day, she found herself waiting for him at the fence. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "Because I told you I do not lie," Weston said. "And I meant it when I said I would build you back with truth." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, weathered and calloused. "I do not know if I am someone who can be built back." "You are," he said, "and I will prove it to you." Then he smiled, not wide, not bold, just soft and certain. For the first time in weeks, Brielle felt something flicker in her chest that was not pain. It was not love yet, but it was the start of something that could be. And this time it would be built on truth. The third week after Weston started coming around, late afternoon light settled low across the valley, long and gold, touching the wheat rows with fire. In the hush between chores, when the children were inside stringing beads with dried berries, Brielle stood barefoot in the garden. A split basket looped over her arm. The peas had come in thicker than she'd expected, though she hadn't planted them with much hope. "Rows coming up clean," Weston said from behind her, his voice even not startling. He'd walked in quiet, as he always did, never crossing the property line without invitation. "You've got good soil here. I fought it hard enough," she said, not turning. "Took a year before anything came up that didn't die on me." He stepped beside her, not brushing her, just close enough to share the same air. "You taught it to stay alive." Brielle dropped a pod into the basket. "That mule's been favoring his right leg again," she said. "I think it's the hoof. I can't lift it long enough to check." "I'll look at it after supper," Weston said. "I brought a file. Might be a stone caught deep." She nodded once, then bent to gather the last of the pods. They walked back toward the house together, quiet except for the soft sound of wind through the grass. At the door, she paused. "I butchered one of the hens this morning. There's stew on the stove," she said. "You're welcome to have some, if you want." He didn't answer right away. Then, "I'd like that." Inside, Gideon was carving at a scrap of pine with a focused frown, and Grace was humming tunelessly as she strung beads into her doll's hair. Neither looked up when Weston stepped in, but both shifted slightly an ease in the shoulders, a flicker of familiarity. He'd become a quiet fixture, not spoken of, but accepted. Brielle ladled the stew into bowls, plain tin ones, but the smell was rich. She slid one to Weston, then sat across from him at the table. His hands were clean, but his nails still held the grit of the day. He ate slowly, with appreciation, not speaking until the bowl was half empty. "You ever think about moving closer to town?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too many eyes there. People talk. They'll talk less when your name's your own again." Her spoon paused. "I'm still married. Not in any way that matters." She looked up, her eyes steady. "Don't say that like it's simple. He's still alive somewhere." "I didn't say it was simple," Weston said. "But he walked away. That leaves you with choices." She didn't answer. He didn't press. After supper, Weston knelt beside the mule, speaking low as he worked the hoof free of a jagged stone. Brielle stood nearby, arms crossed, watching. When he stood, brushing dust from his trousers, he said, "It'll walk easier now. Just keep off the rocky trail behind the pasture for a few days." "I will." He hesitated, then leaned against the fence rail, crossing one boot over the other. "I've been thinking of settling. Not far. There's a small plot near Red Willow Creek, past the ridge." She studied his face. "You stay in motion most of the time." "I used to. But cattle drives aren't the only way to live." "You'd give it up?" "I'd give it up for something that held." The air between them tightened. She looked away first, fixing her gaze on the horizon where the sun dipped behind the hills. "I don't know how to trust what's steady anymore," she said. "You don't have to yet," Weston replied. "You just have to let it stand there long enough." The wind picked up, cool against the heat that lingered in her cheeks. She felt something shift low in her chest, not a rush, not a blaze, but the slow warmth of something waking. He didn't move to touch her. He never had. But somehow presence alone felt like touch. "You riding out in the morning?" she asked. "Not far. Got a few things to see to at the river bend. I'll be back by dusk." "I'll save you a plate then." He nodded, and when he left, it was quiet again. That night, after the children were asleep, Brielle sat by the window, her sewing idle in her lap. The moonlight silvered the garden rows and the patched roof beyond. She thought of Thomas, and how every word he'd spoken had come with a hook. Thought of Weston, who never said more than he meant. She wasn't in love. Not yet. But she wasn't afraid of the thought anymore. And that was something new. The wind had turned by the following afternoon, drawing in the scent of pine smoke from somewhere west. Brielle stood behind the house, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing the washboard with stiff arms. The water had long since cooled, but she didn't stop. Her hands needed something to do. Grace and Gideon sat beneath the cottonwood, stringing wildflowers into loops. Their quiet laughter drifted up between the rustling leaves, a sound that hadn't touched the yard in too long. Weston didn't come at dusk. The stew she'd set aside cooled untouched on the stove. She didn't light a lantern, just sat with her hands idle, the room dimming until the hearth was the only glow left. She told herself it meant nothing he'd said he had things to tend to, but logic didn't quiet the pang behind her ribs. By morning, the mule was restless and the chickens louder than usual, but no rider came up the trail. She swept the floor twice. She mended a tear in Gideon's shirt. Still nothing. It wasn't until the third day that he appeared, dusty and stiff in the saddle, a canvas bundle tied behind him. His hat was pulled low, and his jaw bore a fresh scrape, skin bruised at the hinge. She stepped onto the porch before he'd reached the gate. "You get caught in something?" she asked, voice flatter than she meant. He pulled the reins, then dismounted with care. Ran into trouble at River Bend. Old Trapper's son had too much whiskey and not enough sense. Thought I was someone else. Took a swing. She folded her arms. You swing back. No. Just stepped aside and let him wear himself out. He untied the bundle and held it out. Brought you something. She didn't take it right away. You didn't have to. Didn't have to fix your fence either. But I did. She reached for it then and untied the twine. Inside were folded bolts of muslin and a tin of lye soap. There was also a set of small carving tools wrapped in cloth and a book with cracked leather binding. Gideon came to the porch just then, eyes lighting at the sight of the tools. For the boy, Weston said. He's got steadier hands than most grown men I've met. Brielle looked down at the book. This is more than you needed to bring. I know, Weston said. But I wanted to. She set the bundle inside, then closed the door and stepped back out. You didn't stay away because of the fight, she said. No, then why? There's a widow in town, he said. Runs the post. She said something about you. What did she say? Asked why I was wasting time on a woman who couldn't keep her husband. Brielle's eyes narrowed. And what did you say? I told her I'd rather build something with a woman who stayed through the worst than chase one who'd never seen it. Brielle didn't speak. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes glinted. I don't care what anyone says about me, she said. I know, Weston replied. But I do. I care what they say about you. She stepped off the porch and walked slowly toward him. Why? Because the more I'm around you, the more I start thinking I'd like to be the kind of man who's worthy of you. They stood close, but neither reached for the other. The silence between them wasn't empty, it brimmed with something unspoken but known. I've never had a man bring me something just because, she said. Then the world's been wrong about what you deserve. She looked up at him, eyes steady. You planning on staying? I was hoping to build a place near Red Willow before frost. But I won't start unless you say you want me nearby. She didn't answer right away. Just looked out toward the hills, then back to him. My children trust you, she said. That's not something I take lightly. I don't either. I won't marry again out of need. I'd never ask you to. She took a slow breath. Then build your place. And if it holds through the snow, maybe come spring, we'll see what else can grow. He nodded once. That's enough for me. They didn't touch. Didn't need to. Later, when he left, Gideon ran his fingers over the carving handles, and Grace turned the pages of the brittle book like they held treasure. Brielle sat on the porch, the last of the sun warming her knees. She didn't think of Thomas. She thought of a man who brought muslin and soap without asking for anything. She thought of spring. The first frost came early that year, brushing the wheat stubble with silver and turning the breath of livestock to smoke. Brielle rose before first light, wrapped in her father's old coat, the one she'd tucked away since Missouri. The sleeves swallowed her hands, but the wool still held warmth. She moved through the morning with habitual quiet, checking the stove, stirring the ash, setting the kettle on. Grace stirred beneath the quilt but didn't wake. Gideon slept curled around his flannel bundle like a pup in winter. By the time the sun crested the ridge, Weston's hammer rang out from the far side of the gully. He'd staked his cabin 2 weeks prior, just beyond the cottonwoods where the land rose gently toward Red Willow Creek. She hadn't gone to see it yet. She didn't ask questions about how far along he was or what he needed. He didn't offer. Every day he built, and every evening he returned to the Langford homestead to sit a while, share a plate, and leave without asking for more. That morning, she carried him a jar of lard and a folded scrap of flannel wrapped around a heel of bread. When she reached the clearing, he was bent near the foundation, fitting a freshly shaped beam into place with slow precision. The muscles in his forearms flexed with each strike, and his shirt clung damply to his back. She waited until he looked up. "You ever stop long enough to eat?" she asked. He set the mallet down and wiped his brow. "I forget sometimes." She handed him the bundle. "You'll fall over before winter if you don't take better care." He sat on the edge of the platform and took the bread slowly, as though it carried more weight than it should. "Not much left in town," he said between bites. "2 wagons came through last week, but they're headed north. Stores down to salt pork and dried beans. I've got a few sacks of barley left, and some jerky from the summer kill. We'll trade if it gets worse." He chewed, then looked out over the valley. "You ever think about what comes after all this?" She followed his gaze. "After what?" "After the building, after the harvest, after the cold." "I don't think that far ahead," she said. "Not anymore." He nodded but didn't look away. "I think about it." She stayed quiet, listening to the wind move through the half-framed rafters. "I figure," he said, "if I can get the roof sealed by the end of October, I'll have time to finish the chimney before the real storms come. After that, I'll need help digging the root cellar. I can't do it alone." "You asking me?" "I'm asking if you want to be part of it." She adjusted the jar in her hand. "I've lived too long with someone who said one thing and meant another. I don't ask with a full mouth, and I don't ask things I don't mean." "You're building a life out here," she said. "Not just a house." He met her eyes. "I don't want to do it alone." A gust of wind lifted the edge of her coat, and a few yellow leaves skittered across the clearing. She looked at the beams rising behind him, rough-hewn, square, solid, built by hand, unhurried. "I'll help dig," she said. "And when it's done, we'll talk about what else we build." He didn't smile, but his jaw eased, and he set the tin beside him. "I'd like that." When she turned to go, she glanced back once. He was already working again, shoulders squared, the rhythm of the hammer even. That night, as the stew simmered low and Gideon read aloud from the book Weston had brought, Brielle sat carving a spoon from a thick branch of cottonwood. Grace leaned against her side, half asleep, and the fire popped softly behind them. There was no need to speak of what was coming. Some things, once set in motion, didn't need to be named. By the second week of October, the mornings came sharp, edged with frost that clung to window panes and turned the pump handle brittle beneath Brielle's grip. She wrapped Gideon's scarf twice around his neck before sending him to gather dry grass for the coop, and Grace stayed in to help knead the dough, her small hands dusted with flour. Weston didn't come that morning. She didn't worry, not yet. He'd said he planned to walk north along the creek to find stone for the chimney base, something flat and wide enough to bear heat. Still, she found herself glancing toward the ridge more than once, her ears tuned to hoofbeats that never came. By late afternoon, the wind picked up from the northeast, carrying the edge of snow. Brielle pulled on her boots and lit the lantern early. She didn't say anything to the children, but she packed a cloth bundle with biscuits and a flask of broth, then took the mule and followed the trail that curved toward his cabin. The trees along the slope had gone bare, dry leaves scattered like whispers. When she reached the rise, she saw the cabin half complete, a roof now in place, smoke rising thin from a makeshift vent. The door stood ajar. Inside, Weston was crouched near the hearth, stacking split wood. His coat hung from a peg, and his shirt was damp at the collar. "You didn't come," she said, stepping over the threshold. He looked up, surprised, then pushed upright with a hand to his knee. "I lost track of time. Ridge path took longer than I planned. You could have sent a word through someone in town." "I meant to." She set the bundle on the table, unwrapped it, and poured the broth into a tin cup from his shelf. "Eat. You're shaking." He took the cup, fingers red from the cold. "I thought I'd be finished framing the chimney today, but the ground's harder than it should be." You should have asked for help. I wanted to do it with my own hands. She sat across from him on the bench, watching the lines around his eyes deepen. I keep thinking, he said after a moment, about what it means to stay put. I've never done it. Not really. You're doing it now. I know. But I don't want to build something just to sit in it. I want to share it. I want to fill it with the kind of quiet that doesn't come from being alone. She folded her hands. I've known quiet that felt like punishment. This place, this land, it's the first time it's felt different. He reached for her hand, slow and sure, and she let him take it. I've been careful with you, he said, because I know what it means to lose what you built your life around. But I want to ask you now, honest and clear, when this roof is sealed and the ground settles, will you come here? Will you make this your home with me? She looked at their joined hands, her thumb brushing along the callus at the base of his. Not just for warmth or safety? No, for a life. She nodded once. Then yes, I will. They didn't kiss, not yet. But they held each other's gaze until the fire cracked and the wind outside softened. She stayed with him that night, both of them sitting close on the bench as the storm curled around the cabin, their bodies warming the space between them. They married on the last Sunday of the month, in the clearing below the cottonwoods. Gideon stood beside Weston, his chin lifted with quiet pride, and Grace clutched a sprig of pine wrapped in ribbon. The preacher from town came on foot, bringing his worn Bible and a flask of cider. No guests, no music, just the four of them, the trees, and a sky as pale as milk. Brielle wore a dress she'd sewn herself, the hem hand stitched in the evenings after the children had gone to bed. Weston wore his cleanest shirt and a coat she hadn't seen before, brown wool lined with sheepskin. He'd saved it, he said, for something that mattered. When the vows were spoken and the words sealed, he took her hand like he'd done it 1,000 times. She leaned into him, her cheek brushing the wool at his shoulder. No one clapped, no one cheered, but the stillness that followed was full. That winter the snow came heavy, but the chimney held strong. Weston's cabin became theirs, filled with the scent of coffee and wood smoke, the sound of Grace humming as she traced frost on the window, and Gideon reading aloud when the nights grew long. Brielle worked the soil again come spring, planting roots beside the ones she'd already laid. Weston carved a cradle from pine. It wasn't needed yet, but he built it anyway. They loved each other without rush or drama, just in the way he reached for her hand before sleep, and the way she leaned into him when the wind howled, and the way the children laughed louder when they were both near. No one came asking about Thomas. No one needed to. He belonged to a past that no longer held claim. Together, they built a life that did not ask for perfection, only truth and care, and the quiet joy of waking each morning with nothing left to fear. And that was more than enough.